Alright, what's up YouTube? Today I'm going to be making, I said I was going to do this a long time ago, but fortunately I got real sick and got put in the hospital for a while, and I just got out. And I made this in one day, not even going fast or trying hard. And this is the sheath for the Daredevil Billy Club. I'll put a link in the description for the Billy Club build video. But I made this when I made this Billy Club in mind. I had it in mind to go with this particular leg sheath, like Daredevil has. Not so much sure about Season 1, but I know in Season 2 and in the photos that have been released for the Defenders, you can see it pretty prominently on his hip. And it's been taking me a long time to get this Daredevil cosplay together just because the images from the Netflix show are so dark and grainy, and the cinematography in that is so dark, and it's just been kind of hard for me to get real good photos to start working on things like this sheath or the pants or anything. I've got the mask done, the club done, the sheath so far. So hopefully this video is entertaining and you guys learn something to get some new ideas in your own endeavors. Alright, so in a previous video I had made this Daredevil Billy Club here, and I had mentioned in the video that I was going to come back and do the leg sheath for it, since I am gradually going to be working on a full cosplay for the Netflix Daredevil. But yeah, first thing I'm going to do to make this sheath is I'm going to get some 2mm craft foam. These are just some squares that come in a package that I got from Walmart. So you can find these essentially anywhere. And the first thing I'm going to do is wrap this around here. You'll notice there is a little ridge here. This is basically going to act as a stopper so that it doesn't go any further into the sheath. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this around it, figure out just exactly how long this is. Then I'm going to cut the piece down the length here, and I'm going to go ahead and contact cement that together to make a nice little tube. Okay, so even though I've gone through and I've measured this, I still took the time. I cut it a slightly bit larger just to make sure that it is going to fit around this whenever I'm done, because I want both of these pieces to be in it as exact and as snug as possible. And even though I made both sides of this, what I feel like is pretty symmetrical, I don't care how symmetrical something looks. It may be a millimeter smaller or a millimeter bigger, so make sure that they're both going to fit before you contact cement them, or super glue them, or whatever it is that you're using. I'm going to be using just some DAP Weldwood contact cement. If you haven't used this stuff, you simply just apply it to each edge that you want it to glue. You let it sit about 10-15 minutes and you go ahead and put them together. So as I'm waiting on these pieces here to go ahead and set so I can contact cement the edges together, I wanted to upload real quick a little video clip of the photo, the only reference photo I could find that I had to lighten and flip and crop and sharpen up as much as I could. And maybe by the time you're watching this in the future, there will be a better reference photo, but scouring just online, I couldn't find hardly anything as far as like close-ups of stuff like the actual holster for his baton. So this is as much as possible, from what I can see from the reference photos. I'm going to make this as close as I can, but don't hold it against me if it's not that close, because I just can't find that great of photos. But yeah, here is the photo. Okay, so when you're looking at the reference photo, you'll notice there's like this ridged area at the top. And to make that, I just took an X-Acto knife and still a 2mm piece of foam, same as the yellow that I used in the tubes, but just black. And that's partly to show a contrast for you guys at home, and partly just so I don't have to worry about painting in the nooks and crannies black first, because I am going to dry brush this to make it look like weathered metal, and I'd like to have these cracks nice and dark. So the black EVA foam is an easy, straightforward option to do that. And what I did was I took the X-Acto knife and I cut into it, but I didn't cut all the way through it. I just cut enough into the foam that it made lines. And you'll notice, whenever I curl it, it makes this nice ribbed pattern, and that's what's going to go on the top part of your Billy Club holster. And you can see I've already cut and glued these first two pieces on here, and they both go on the top respectively. Next, I have a couple of thin strips I'm going to glue around the bottom on each piece. And one other thing I did that's an easy trick and tip is I cut a couple of very thin very thin strips, and I put them on either side of the seam here on the back. This is going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to act as a guide for me to glue these on. See, pretty simple. And it's also going to act as a nice surface area for me to put some super glue and some hot glue on, because both of these are going to have to get glued onto another actual hunk of EVA foam, so that you have two side by side like this. Whenever we're done, the billy clubs will go through it and your straps will come off this bottom piece. Let's not focus on that right now. Right now, let's just focus on getting our backside shored up to be glued, scoring and cutting our ribbed pieces, and lastly, I'm going to be gluing these strips here on the bottom. Alright, now that I've put all these pieces on it, glued them all together, got my backside nice and level to go ahead and attach to my piece, I'm going to go on to the actual piece that these two are going to be anchored to. And this is just really simple. It's a piece of EVA foam mat. This came in a 6-foot roll for about 20 bucks at Just Cause Cosplay Supply here in town where I live. You can also check them out online. And it comes in a big rolled mat, and I had some of this pieces left over from the last build that I did, which was a Batman chest armor that had clips for my cape and everything. And I got some scraps left over from that, so I just cut a piece of it. And the piece is shorter than the length of these, and just wide enough that they can both fit. But when I glue them on side by side, part of the reason why I'm gluing them separate, I'm not going to glue them so the centers are touching. I want them to have a little bit of space. And I want them to have space so that when you tighten this on your hip, it flexes a little or it flattens out a little. They have a little leeway to move, and they're not just going to be smashed together. And to glue these on here, I'm going to go ahead and center them up and glue them on using some super glue and a little bead of hot glue. Okay, here I am gluing these on. I've already glued this side here on, so it's nice and snug. I did put a bead of hot glue on the edge of it just to make sure it stays good and firm there. And you'll notice, the only reason I'm filming this real quick is because you'll notice I have the billy clubs inside of them. This is to help give me a little more ease in placement, but also to make sure that they have the correct round shape that I need, and that they're sitting exactly where I want them whenever I glue these on. Because once they're there, they're there. And if I glue these on and I press these down without the billy clubs inside, and these yellow parts happen to get smashed and a little flat, it's just not going to fit right whenever I try to put them back in. So that's why I have the billy clubs inside of these sheaths as I'm gluing them onto the holster rig itself. Okay? Alright, now that my pieces are glued on, I did go through in the back spot here and just put a little bit of hot glue here and there just to give a little bead to help reinforce it. Nothing that you should hopefully see when you're wearing it, but it'll be concealed but still add a little bit of strength. And next, before I go ahead and start painting this, I need to move on to the next phase, which is sealing up this foam. If you don't seal the foam before you paint it, then it will end up absorbing a lot of the paint and won't look good. The foam, once the paint dries, will become more brittle. Whereas if you seal it with, say, something like silicone, or you can use Plastidip. But today I'm going to be using some Mod Podge. This stuff is fairly inexpensive. I mean, it's $5, but I've had this for months, and I've sealed a lot of different foam props. Sometimes you may have to use a couple coats, and depending on how you coat it and brush it, will give it a certain texture too. If I just put one thin coat and let it dry, it's not going to fully seal the foam. There will be little like air pockets, but whenever I paint it, you'll see those little pits, and it'll give it a cool definition. And if you give it several, thick, even coats, it'll be nice and sheen and smooth. And another thing you can do when those coats are drying is you can take your brush and drag it over the coats as they're tacky, and that'll put some nice like line texture in it and make it look more like steel. How you decide to seal the foam is ultimately up to you. I'm just going to goop some on for a first initial layer on this underpiece where I glued it to, as well as the tubes. And then I'm going to go ahead and put on a second layer and probably texture a little bit just on these pieces here. Maybe on the end pieces, especially around the edges, to give it a little definition. You can always paint on details like that look like texture, but when the light hits it, it's going to look flat. When you have the texture in whatever you're making and the light hits it, it looks so much better. And stuff's pretty goopy, pretty thick. Just go ahead and get my brush nice and damp, and I just start brushing it on evenly throughout the whole entirety of the surface here, and try to get it nice and coated. Okay, so whilst I am waiting on the Mod Podge to dry so I can paint that piece, I'm going to go ahead and start preparing my straps. And these straps are going to attach to the side, two on one side, two on the other of the holster, and they're going to go around my leg and secure nice and tight. Now, if I use strapping or cloth a lot of times, it tends to bunch up or twist. And if I use the EVA foam, it looks kind of plain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some contact cement and some spray adhesive, and I'm going to take these strips here. These are 5mm EVA foam, cut about 1 inch wide, and I'm going to take some of this scrap pleather that I have. I'm going to cut strips of it, and I'm going to go ahead and contact cement that onto the foam, and that's going to give it a nice texture and make it look like cloth or leather or something like that. And this stuff is really lightweight. There's really nothing to it, but as you can see, it has a pretty cool texture to it. I use this on my Batman cape, and this just happened to be some of the excess scraps. So yeah, that's what I'm going to go ahead and glue onto here next. And that'll give me a nice, firm, solid piece to wrap around my leg and to attach with, but it'll still have a nice texture. Okay, so what I got here is my 4 strips of EVA foam. And I'm going to go ahead and use some of this DAP Weldwood contact cement. And just going to go ahead and pretty liberally apply this to the foam itself. Now, you can use this on the cloth, but I feel like it's pretty hard and messy. Even if you wear gloves, it gets all over the gloves stick to each other, the gloves stick to the cloth. It's just kind of a mess. So, I'm going to go ahead here, stop about halfway down, go ahead and stop there. Because for the actual cloth pieces, I've taken and laid them out with the textured side down. The side that is up is the cloth side. And I'm going to go ahead and spray that with some Loctite spray adhesive. This stuff's pretty good. Put the contact cement on first, give it 15 minutes. And I'm going to spray these strips over here on the cloth side, not the textured side. And that only needs to sit for a few minutes. Then I'm going to go ahead and join the two together. Okay, I've got my pleather glued to my strips of EVA foam. And yeah, obviously you can see these cuts are not straight on the cloth. I can't cut cloth very straight, but that's okay. I'm going to let this dry for an hour, and I'm going to go back through with a pair of scissors. And I'm just going to go right along the edge. I'm going to trim all that excess off so it's nice and even with the EVA foam. And I also went ahead and took and put the last coat of Mod Podge on here that is now drying. That should give me a nice steely textured look whenever it's done, and I can go ahead and paint that up. In the meantime, I'm going to let this dry for an hour or so. And as it does, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of large books on it to weight it down. Okay, I've got my air compressor all set up here with my airbrush and some paint in it. And to paint this, I'm going to be using some opaque black that I'd also mixed with some of this, get this in focus, 4030 Intercoat Mix Additive. It's a clear balancing agent. It's water-based and it's polyurethane, which means it's going to give it a nice thick coat over this that's going to adhere real good to the Mod Podge and the foam. Now, you don't have to do this. You can use just regular old craft paint and a brush and paint it black. Or you can use spray paint. I like the airbrush because it's quick. And it's kind of an investment, spending the money for the compressor and everything. But once you get it, you learn how to mix your own colors and how to thin them out. It goes so much farther than spray paint. And it dries so much faster. Within an hour, this will be done. With the spray paint, I have to wait 24 hours or 48 hours or however long. And you don't get the brush strokes that you get from the craft paint. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and flip on my compressor here. Give a couple test sprays. Make sure it's coming out. Go ahead and start giving it a light coat. Now, I did thin this down pretty thin. Whenever you thin down your paints, you typically have to make more than one pass over it, but like I say, these coats dry so fast and so evenly that within 15-20 minutes of painting, you got a couple coats, and within an hour, your whole entire piece will be dry. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to primer this completely black. Alright, this has had plenty of time to dry, and I feel pretty happy overall with the texture and the way that it looks. And now I'm going to go ahead and use the airbrush again. This time, I'm using some Wicked Colors Silver by Creatix. Let's see, the exact name of the paint is Wicked Silver. I mean, it's silver. And all I do is I thin that out a little bit. I turn the pressure down on the airbrush so it's not too high. What I'm going to do then is give it a nice light dusting. What that does is just gives it a general metallic look without being too obnoxious. By just giving it a light overspray over this high gloss black will make it look metallic without making it look too obnoxious. You know, I feel like the more silver that I end up putting on stuff, the uglier it honestly gets and the more tacky it looks. So, pressure wasn't quite high enough. There you can kind of start to see, starting to get this silver sheen. I'm still going to go through with a dry brush and some acrylic craft paint to add some further definition to it. But just to give it that subtle undercolor, I use the airbrush and just give it a nice even coat. There we go. Not too much, not too little. Starting to look metallic without looking completely ugly and obnoxious, like when you put too much spray paint. Okay, this is a similar technique to what I used on the Daredevil club itself to give it that nice metallic look. I'm going to go ahead and let that dry for 20-30 minutes. We're going to come back to the airbrushing. I'm going to trim the excess cloth off this, start gluing it all together. I'm getting ready to have the final piece and try it on. Alright, now that this has had some time to sit and dry, and I had some dinner, I'm going to go back through with the brush. And what I have here is some Folk Art Metallic Sterling Silver. And for this, I'm just going to do some dry brushing. This will give it a little bit of highlights and lowlights. In a dry brush, I basically just dab the end of it here into some of this excess paint. Get the tip of it nice and wet. I take and I just kind of brush off some of the excess. Okay, and from there, just give a light back and forth with it. And you're going to do this a couple times to build up some layers. But what it's going to do is it's going to add up gradually a little layer of paint up here on these ridges and stuff. And I'm also going to put some on this very edge as well to help let it stand out and have a little bit more wear, and on these edges down here as well. Okay, hopefully this will show up pretty good on camera. You'll notice here I put some heavier brushing up on these ends here, on these ends down here, because this edge right here is an area, if this was a real metal prop, or I'm sorry, a real metal sheath or something like that, you'd have the wear and tear. You'd have that extra little wear on the edges. Same with these edges here. And also, you know, brush the texture so it sticks out a little bit. Now, it's obviously not even in uniform, but you don't want it even in uniform. You want it to look somewhat chaotic. You know what I mean? You want it to look like an actual thing. Now, next what I'm going to do is I have some of this black acrylic. It's really flat, but I like that about it. Sometimes works good, sometimes doesn't. But for what I need it for here, I'm going to use it to paint this bottom edge right here. They got some of the silver overspray on it. And this other side here as well is going to get painted with it to help dull it down so that this sheath part really pops. Alright, next I've begun gluing on the straps that I covered with the pleather. And the way I'm gluing them on here, try to get this in the light, is I'm gluing them flush with the top of this piece right here. And what that's going to do is it's going to leave a little space on the bottom. Flip this over here, you can see this bottom space, I did them all except one. I just put a glob of some hot glue. You'll see here where the gap is that I'm talking about. I just super glued this strap on. And this gap here, just to fill it in, help give it a little strength, just like I did on these other three. Just going to go ahead and first I start by putting a little bead across it. Once the bead has had time to cool, I know it's nice and solid, I'll go ahead and put a little more on it like I did with these other three. Okay, and here it is, looking pretty cool so far now that I got the straps glue on onto it. And I got this all set in place here. Remember when I made this club, I mentioned that ring, and that ring was going to be a stopper for the sheath that I was going to make. Well, there it is. Okay, of course, this isn't it. Still have to take some Velcro. Got some pieces of it here. Little knickknacks lying around. I have to trim these to the proper length. They wrap around my leg and put some Velcro on them. And I'm going to go ahead and do that next off camera. That's something you're just going to have to size and figure out yourself. And then, yeah, come back, try it on, see how it looks on me. Okay, so here it is. I just got this set over some ratty old jeans. But you can see with the straps, fits pretty tight. It's snug enough, but I don't have to worry about it just come flying out like at a convention when I don't want it to. And it fits pretty good. Now I imagine this is going to start creeping down my leg as I walk. Which brings me on to the next part of this. This, at least as far as my intentions go now, it's going to take a long time for me to finish this costume. But this is going to be part of a full cosplay. And one of the things I'm probably going to do is put some Velcro on the backside of this and some Velcro on the actual like motorcycle style Daredevil pants I'm going to work on next. That way it sticks there. Another thing you can do is have a strap that comes up and goes over a belt, loops back down, and Velcros on the back. That'll help hold it in place, much like the holster on a gun. Like I say, it is pretty tight, but you can get it out. Pop it back in. And the thing is, like I say, since this is meant for costuming purposes and not for, say, like something like a fan film. If I was going to do a fan film, I'd make these raised ridges that stop it a little bit thicker, and I'd make this opening a little bigger, so it wouldn't be such a slow draw. It'd be a quick, straight out the gate type thing. So hopefully this was helpful. Gave you guys some ideas for your Daredevil cosplay. Hopefully you thought this was cool and you liked it. And as always, thanks for watching. I hope this inspired you to make something. And please like and subscribe the video if you enjoyed it.